Hello, I'm Yidan Chu from the Australian Institute of International Affairs. I'm speaking with Peter McCawley, a visiting fellow from the Indonesia program at the Australian National University. Peter recently launched the Asian Development Bank's history, Banking on the Future of Asia and Pacific, 50 years of the Asian Development Bank. This evening, he's talking at the AWI ACT branch about the history and the policy lessons it provides. Thank you for joining me, Peter. The Asian Development Bank has been operating for half a century. What do you think are the most important achievements during that time?
Well, the bank has really had three main activities. It's more than a bank.
Yeah.
And in fact, the three main activities are captured in the description of the bank as a multilateral development bank. And each of those words gives us a key to what it has done. For the first 10 years after it was established, and that was in 1966, it needed to establish itself as a bank. And so it spent 10 years, roughly 10 years, strengthening its financial reputation both across Asia and across the world, so that it was a reputable bank, it could raise funds in international markets, and it could support projects and other activities in developing countries in Asia. But then, once it had established itself as a bank, it moved on to, if you like, the second word in that multilateral development.
Yeah.
It began to emphasise development, not just a bank, but broader activities, particularly related to capacity building, that's building the capacity, the skills of institutions in developing countries, and also strengthening policies and thinking about development. And then that really took another 10 years. And then in the third decade of its activities, it really became more multilateral. It became more multilateral because, first of all, the two giant countries of Asia joined as borrowers.
Yeah.
They had not initially. That was China and India. And it began many regional programs, multilateralism in terms of regionalism.
Yeah.
So it did these three main things. It worked as a bank, it promoted development activities through policy building and capacity building activities, and it supports regionalism.
Yeah. What mistakes had ADB made in participating in the transformations in Asia?
Well, I don't think the bank has really made any mistakes as such.
Yeah.
It has been criticised at times for being a bit too slow.
Oh.
It's a multilateral institution, it's an international institution, and often it takes time to get agreement about things. And also it is not a highly entrepreneurial organisation. It's owned by governments. It's owned by 67 governments, both governments in Asia and across the world. And so it needs to consult with governments before it takes any dramatic action. So it has been criticised for being too slow. But on the other hand, because it is deliberate in what it has done, its policies have been fairly well formulated, and also, as a matter of fact, sometimes being slow has turned out to be a strength. It was a strength, for example, in the Asian financial crisis 20 years ago, because while other institutions had overlent and overextended themselves, it so happened that the ADB had not overextended itself and in fact was in a very strong position to respond in times of crisis.
And what are the lessons for policymakers?
Well, I think the lessons from the bank itself are really to work in those three areas. To work as a bank, to promote policies for development, and to strengthen regionalism. All of those three activities are important. In terms of policies and lessons for developing countries in the region, and indeed the whole world really, what we've learnt from the marvellous experience of Asia in the past 50 years, it's been an astonishing period, and what we've really learnt is that steady policies in macroeconomics, fiscal policy, monetary policy, and in what we call microeconomics, that's in sectoral policies, in agriculture, infrastructure, education, social activities, that there's really no substitute for steady and sensible policies designed to build and to strengthen the region. Now, those lessons have stood the test of time well in Asia, and increasingly countries have adopted really more market-oriented policies, although there's a good deal of government activity as well. So those are the broad lessons for policy.
And how can the ADB respond to the economic challenges emerging in Asia?
Well, of course, there are many. There are many challenges going ahead. Asia has done very well on the whole in the last 50 years, but it started out in a very difficult situation in the 50s and 60s. So although it's come a long way, there's a long way to go. Now, the Asian Development Bank needs to continue its activities in those three main areas. As a bank supporting many projects and other activities in the region. It needs to support policy reform. Many policy reforms are still needed in Asia, and it needs to strengthen regionalism. Asia still needs to bind itself together, to work together. Asian countries need to learn to strengthen their mutual activities. Now, looking beyond that, if you were to ask me one main area that I would like to see the bank focus on, although there are many, it's infrastructure. Asia faces an enormous infrastructure challenge in terms of transport and communications, energy, water. I mean, 1 billion people or more in Asia still don't have access to clean water, for example. We can put somebody on the moon, but we can't get clean water to kids in developing countries. So the ADB, in a way, needs to stick to what you might call basic activities in the region. Electric power, roads, water, these sorts of things to help strengthen the lives of people in the region.
Thank you again for joining us today, Peter. To see more interviews and stay up to date with AWIA's events and analysis of international affairs, please like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter.